that concludes the public affairs report.
Thank you, Joan. Sorry, Frank, you didn't go first this time, but we are now on to you. E, licensing, agenda item E, excuse me.
Guess I better do that. Or I better get closer, one of the two. Good afternoon. The Licensing Committee met on May 13th, 2019. It was a productive meeting, and the committee identified several items for the board to consider today. Later in the licensing section, the board will consider whether to enter into a reciprocity agreement with North Carolina. In the legislative portion of today's meeting, the board will also consider making legislative changes to the construction management education account and creating a new tree licensing classification. The committee reviewed all these proposals, provided staff input, and look forward to hearing board comment on these items. Are there any committee members who would like to add or comment?
I have a question.
Okay.
It seems to me, I recall reading some of that legislative proposal that included within the verbiage that the 15-foot limit would apply to tree planting. Am I correct about that?
Part of it, that's correct. It's probably more appropriate when we get to that item to get into the details. But we do have a suggested change for the 15-foot limit.
Do board members have any comments? None? Okay. Does anyone from the public have any comments? Okay, moving on. I would like to ask Justin to give us a brief update on the home improvement license classification work staff are doing. Justin.
Thank you, Frank. We've held our first stakeholder meeting, which was in line with what was identified in the strategic plan. I've also met with several companies who mainly are focusing around the remodeling industry to get more information. And staff and I are continuing to collect data, both internally by reviewing our experience process. We keep running those statistics, and we're also trying to get further data from various sources outside of the board. And I'm hoping to have. We're trying to essentially do two things with this data collection. We're trying to assess need, and we're trying to assess the scope of what this license would do. And I hope by the end of the year that we'll have a nice package for you.
Thank you. My only comment about this would be that as we add new classifications, we're going to talk about other licenses, reciprocity agreements and stuff that personally my feeling would be that we should require all of those to provide workers' comp insurance as part of their requirement, because we're already fighting this in other areas. So do board members have any comments?
A comment?
Yes.
Justin, how many people attended the stakeholder meeting?
It was very few. We sent it out to about 30 different industry types. I believe we had 5 industry representatives there that day. But thankfully, I've since that time reached out to several other entities who have expressed some interest. So I'm trying to build my list. But if you have suggestions, I'd love to hear them, maybe offline.
So are you proposing another stakeholder meeting?
I absolutely am. But right now, I'm trying to get individual feedback from various parties who have expressed an interest, and I'm trying to find more.
My only concern is that this has been going on for a long time, and it just seems like we're going, and so maybe we need to use some other type of method to get the word out, to get more stakeholders or whatever, because we need that information. So
I agree.
Are there any board member comments? Or any comments from the public on this issue? Tanya, I'm sorry.
Just thinking that maybe we could do a survey. We could put a survey out, Nancy, so we can try and solicit more input, an online survey. Would that work? Okay.
Are there any public comments? Hearing none. We'll move on to the next item. Licensing program update. Next item is a licensing program update, which begins on page 37. It contains statistics through the end of April. Justin, can you please provide an update?
Yes, as I said at our previous, or actually 2 previous board meetings, our applications are certainly up. As you'll see, April, we saw 1,400. We haven't seen numbers like that in quite some time. For the year of 2019, just if we project out, we're on pace to have 44,000 applications, which is a number we haven't seen since the downturn. With that in mind, so that information is provided on page 37. This is actually the breakout month by month of the apps that we're receiving. The following page, on page 38, is just the applications we're processing. And at this point, I'd actually like to particularly call out one staffer that works in the licensing division. Dana D'Onofrio works in our app exam unit. She and her team have done an outstanding job working overtime on Saturdays and after work to really handle this huge glut of applications. She's done a fantastic job, and that's why you'll see even in April, she processed a total of 2,900 applications when they're really equipped to do about 1,600 to 1,700 at best. Moving over to page 29, this is just showing you our overall turnaround time frame for processing applications. You'll note in March for original app exams, we were up to a 3-week processing timeline, hence that's why we were doing the overtime. That number is actually down to, I believe, 2.2 at this point. So our goal is to try to have everything have a 2-week turnaround time frame. You'll also notice at the bottom, our certified license history is a bit high. We've essentially needed to cross-train staff to make sure that we get that number back down, and we are working on that. So I'm actually down to 3 weeks, and I hope to be at 2 weeks very shortly. Moving to the next page, this is just our typical total processing from the minute you get in the door till you take your exam, you post your bond, et cetera. These statistics, not a lot has changed in the overall turnaround time frames. And then moving over to renewals, which is on page 42. Our renewals are also up. We're able to handle that workload a bit better, just there's less paperwork there. So we are keeping our numbers low, but our renewals are up. So for the month of April, we're actually at 12,000 as well as the prior month. But that's also a bit cyclical. There are different times in the year people typically get a license. It sort of quiets down in the winter months, and then usually come January, February, you'll start to see it tick up again as the warm weather is on the horizon. And so these numbers are fairly standard for us. Moving to workers' comp, our typical workers' comp coverage versus exemption, there hasn't been any particular change, no significant change there. Then moving to page 44 is just a breakdown of our workers' comp coverage by license type. Again, you'll note the largest exemption is in the B. Just to Frank's point, this is just an overall breakdown of who's got an exemption right now. Moving to page 45 on our just criminal background fingerprints, no real change in our statistics at the moment. Our denials are well below 1%. It's pretty standard. No significant changes there. And then moving to experience verification, which is on page 46. You'll note that our pending apps were high late last year, and that's because we had to pull some staff off of this to work on implementation of a new bond procedure. We've since done that. We've gotten the staff back on, and these numbers are coming down. So these numbers are going to look even better as the months progress. With that, I'll move to our LIC, the Licensing Information Center. Our call wait times are traditionally now at 1:30. I rarely see a week where anyone's even on hold for 2 minutes. So I'm very happy with that. One thing that we will be changing in the coming months is just how you have to press the phone prompts to get to a live person. We want to make that simpler, so we're going to be looking at that. So right now, there's a cheat code that we can give everyone, and I always forget it. I think it's 299. 129. 129. But I'd like to not have to give them a cheat code, so I just want to give them that option up front. If they want to talk to a person, they're going to talk to a person. Our judgment statistics are fairly standard. There hasn't been a lot of changes in the last quarter since we reported, and that also includes the outstanding liabilities for fellow sister state agencies. And that concludes the licensing update.
excuse me.
So Justin, on the wait time, their longest wait time, it says, is that under April, 638? So 6 minutes, 6.5 minutes?
That's the longest. So that's not the average, that's the longest in that particular month.
The average is 2.5.
But since, the reason for my comments was since April, so I have May statistics, I get them each week, and we're way coming down. That's what I was trying to report. The new numbers you're gonna see are gonna be about 1.5 minutes, 1:45.
Okay.
Yes, but
I have an actual comment. Part of my job, I work with the CEC an awful lot, and right now they're doing a deal with compliance on HVAC equipment and being installed in California, replacement equipment. And there've been comments coming out by different entities trying to expand the C20 contractors, I guess, scope of work to include structural and other things. So I just want to make sure that the board actually looks at that and makes sure that they comment on it when they can see it. And and I can send you the links to the stuff if needed, but I don't like people just throwing things out there to expand the C20 license without talking to the contractor's license board about it. So just making a comment, and anybody wants any of the information, I can send it to them.
Well, thank you, David. We're working very closely with the CEC on the responsible contractor policy, and they've asked that you be part of that discussion, so that's very helpful. And we will be working with them to make sure that our regulatory language lines up with what they're proposing.
Okay, so that would be a great future agenda item, I think, maybe to discuss in more detail.
Okay, no more of that. Are there any?
Actually, I have a question.
Yes.
I have a question. You mentioned that because of technology, there was a lowering of the time for renewals, and I couldn't recall what type of technology or what changes, because renewals are so critical.
Oh,
Can
no,
you
I'm sorry.
elaborate?
I'm sorry, I must have misspoke. I didn't mean to speak over you.
Well, I don't
Susan.
hear so well anymore either.
No, there's fewer moving parts to processing a renewal application. And so even when they go up, we can usually process them more quickly. There hasn't been a technical change, so I apologize if I misspoke. So I was just trying to say our renewals are up, but we're still really maintaining our processing time of 2 weeks.
Okay, so what is it, though, about the process of renewal that allows you that flexibility? I was just wondering.
I have a lot of staff that, the best way to explain it is as your typical life at CSLB, that's usually sort of where you start. And a lot of people become familiar with that. And then they sort of, they can sort of move on to other areas, and they may start working on more complex transactions. But when I have a huge glut, I can pull people who have the experience, and then we can get them down quickly.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other board member comments? I have one thing, Justin. What is, we have 230,550 active contractors. How does that compare with before the recession? This is not trying to play stump the cheap. I'm just you know.
The number is just starting to tick up. Since I started, we had about 280. I do not know, I haven't looked at the numbers that far back, but I'm happy to report that. We're just starting to tick up, but with these increased applications, a lot of times, the increase really started in October, but it really got going in January. And so my expectation is that population you're really gonna start seeing now, because when someone comes in with an original application, it's typically about 3 to 6 months from when they start to when they're done. And that, for the most part, is because a lot of them take time to study for the exam before they sit for it. And then sometimes it's difficult to line up a bond. But I'm expecting to see those numbers start to really tick up for our next presentation.
Thank you.
I don't want to say we'll be at 300,000 soon, but that's at least my hope.
Well, you got 44,000, you know, this
Yeah.
last month or something, was it?
Yeah.
All right, is there any public comment on this item? Hearing none? Moving on to the testing program. Moving to the testing program update on page 55 of your packet. Again, Justin, would you please provide us with an update?
Certainly. Our exams, for the most part, have also seen an increase, but it's been holding, for the most part, steady. We had the way these numbers report, which is on page 55, it looks like there hasn't been an increase, but again, exams are sort of cyclical, so we usually expect to see in the latter part of the year an increase, and then in the first part of the year, a decrease. But this actually is very similar to what was in the latter part of the year. I also wanted to comment that we lost a very valuable staff member who's been with the Contractors Board for a very long time. She's actually gone to work for the DCA's testing services, their OPES, who's made a presentation. But Natalie Chernich she's actually left the board, and so we've got huge shoes to fill. We're currently looking for her replacement right now. It's her job to oversee the actual 8 testing centers throughout the state on the day-to-day basis and make sure there's no hiccups in the exams. So I'm very motivated to not have to do that and to get Natalie's replacement as soon as possible. But she certainly will be missed. She was an amazing staffer. On the exam development side, we currently have 4 different exams under occupational analysis, and we're updating 7 through item banking.
Board member comments?
Justin, in regards to the exams and when you're redoing the questions and all, how do you pick, do you have some kind of criteria as how you pick an expert witness to help with that, developing that bank of questions?
So we use subject matter experts. It is volunteer-based. I am aware that there are criteria, but I don't remember them. I apologize. I can certainly get that information, but I wouldn't want to misspeak.
I know that one of the criteria is that you have to be a licensee in that cloud. You have to hold the license.
Yeah.
In order to be a subject matter expert.
Correct.
And I would just add that we're looking to expand our data, our pool of experts for this program. So if you have anybody you think that would be helpful, the industry is changing, want to make sure they're keeping up with the industry, please provide us the names of those experts so we can add them to it. And I know we're looking very, very closely at code compliance issues in a lot of these different industries.
The reason I bring it up is because I recently had a situation in the building department with a gentleman, a contractor, trying to work out a class and pull a permit. And he did kind of provide to me that one of the things he also does, I remember, is he said that he's one of the expert witnesses for the exams, but yet he's trying to pull a permit. So just how we vet those people would be really important.
So to Dave's point, that's actually one of our strategic plan objectives that we will be working on that very shortly. But just on a side note, maybe after the meeting, I would like that name, if that's all right.
And I also wanted to add, when we were redoing the documentation, and we were talking about the subject matter experts, when they pull, it is, they also have new licensees as well as those who have had a license for 40 years. So it's a very interesting mix they felt was important with the perspective of upgrading the tests. And I thought that was good.
Any other board member comments? Any public comments on this subject? Hearing none, we'll move on to item D. Review, discussion, and possible action on whether to enter into reciprocity agreement with North Carolina and Oregon for the B General Contractor's License and legislative options for trade exam waivers. This item begins on page 61. In April 2018, the board directed staff to pursue reciprocity agreements, including one with North Carolina Licensing Board for General Contractors. The licensing committee discussed this item at the May meeting. Justin, would you give us an update?
Certainly. So prior to my time with the board wanted to enter into several reciprocity agreements, and specifically about mid last year, directed staff to take a look at several states that offer the NASCL exam. 2 of the states that we've evaluated since that time have been North Carolina and Oregon. In particular with North Carolina has 2 different ways to pass the test. You can take the NASCL test, and you can take North Carolina specific trade exam test. We entered into discussions with David's counterpart, it's not the registrar, but his counterpart, and we asked if there was a way we could create an agreement with just the individuals who passed the NASCLA exam. That was a non-starter for the North Carolina registrar. And so the actual directive that we received from the board was just to pursue reciprocity agreements with states that had the NASCLA-only exam, and this isn't the case with North Carolina anymore. We briefed the licensing committee on that, and the staff recommendation is that we not pursue a reciprocity agreement at this time with North Carolina, because it's difficult if you're going to go on a state-by-state level to evaluate each of these exams and make sure that they're going to be similar with our own exam requirements. In addition to that, even if they're similar to our exam requirements now, that may not be the case when they update them in the coming years. Our solution to this with NASCLA was that our testing division is actually going to be is a part of the occupational analysis and exam development process, so that we'll sort of always be a cook in that kitchen and understand what's going on with that particular exam. So that's again, I believe, part of the reason that the board was comfortable with state pursuing reciprocity agreements with states that have that NASCLA exam. Based on that, in addition, just with regard to Oregon, Oregon actually doesn't have a trade exam, so there's no reciprocity agreement we essentially can enter into. For those reasons, staff recommended to the licensing committee that we not pursue a reciprocity agreement with North Carolina or Oregon at this time. At the bottom of page 62, staff has essentially described the rationale behind the licensing committee recommendation. However, I did want to read aloud the specific motion, which was not included in the packet. So I'll read that now, and then if anyone has questions, I'll be happy to reread it again. But the specific motion, excuse me, was that the board directs staff not to enter into an agreement with North Carolina and Oregon at this time, but explore the feasibility of a legislative proposal to make eligible for a CSLB B general building trade exam waiver to any individual in the United States who has passed the NASCLA exam and has 5 years of good standing as a licensed general contractor in another state. Staff would report its findings to the licensing committee. That's the specific motion that was passed.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
is that a fully formed motion? It is, so, okay, so. Okay, so we got to discuss the motion.
Yeah, we have board comments.
Okay.
Any board comments?
I do. I don't think that I agree with going forward on any relationship and granting any waivers to any states that don't rise to our standard. It's unfair to the employers and contractors here in California. I'm just going to leave it there.
As an observation of the motion, I think it's not giving a waiver to any state. I think it's waiver to any individual who has passed the NASLA, is that correct?
Correct.
Exam and has 5 years good standing as a licensed general contractor in another state. And I would assume that we're still doing the legal portion of the testing. This is A and B, right? I mean, it'd be trade and then.
Just the trade.
Just the trade,
So
just the trade. You
would
still
be
have to
the
do law
only
and
thing would be
business.
waived, right?
And again, the way the motion is currently drafted, it's just asking staff to do research. This wouldn't be, there would have to be more discussion before the board considered such a thing.
Do any other board members have a comment? Does the public have a comment?
Oh, just, I wanted to re-clarify that the law relating to the waiver of the trade exams on page 61 at the bottom, and it doesn't allow the board to accept or allow a waiver if the board can't establish or the registrar can't establish that the qualifications for licensure are the same as or greater than California's. So speaking to your point, Mr. Beltrana, you couldn't legally do it if it didn't meet those minimum requirements anyway. So I think what the staff are reporting is that they could not confirm with North Carolina in particular that that alternate exam was meeting the same or greater requirements than California has. And so for that reason, they recommend not pursuing the factual, because they're just trying to factually establish whether those qualifications are the same or greater, so the registrar could consider doing a waiver. But since they aren't able to do that, they're coming back and telling you that they recommend that you don't pursue it at this time. Doesn't mean you couldn't do it sometime in the future or revisit the issue in the future.
Just a clarification, Justin, the NASLA exam for trade, we assume is equivalent to the California exam?
The board reached that conclusion last April, I believe. Yes.
I just wanted to reiterate.
Yes, and
that, sir.
yes, that's correct.
Okay. So, are there any public comments on this issue? Okay. Well, we have a fully formed motion, so do we need a second, or does we just go ahead and we just vote? Okay. Then, please, would you call the roll?
Paula Richardson,
Aye.
Kevin Albanese. Aye. Frank Altamura,
Yes.
Augie Beltran,
Aye.
David Delatorre,
Aye.
Dave Diaz,
Yes.
Susan Granzella, Joan Hancock,
Aye.
Mike Layden, Frank Shatter,
Aye.
Johnny Simpson, Nancy Springer.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, the motion is passed. And I think, so now we're on to item E, updates and discussion of licensing 2019-2021 strategic plan. You can see the updates on page 65 of your meeting packet. Justin, will you give us an update?
Happy to. So I'm very pleased to announce that our asbestos open book examination is now online. That's the first item. We've had it up and running for, I want to say roughly a month, I think just shy of a month. We've had some issues with individuals being able to submit their scores, but I'm going to do my best to speak about something I know nothing about. It has to do with, we needed to upgrade our RAM, and that's what we're doing right now. So in the computer, there's an invisible sheet, and we're going to get a bigger sheet. But with that, there shouldn't be people who are stuck trying to submit their scores. Otherwise, it looks like that function is working well. Specifically, a woman named Andrea Sisto at the board has been instrumental in getting that up and running, so I'm very thankful to her for getting that working. In addition to that, we also had just updated the actual exam, the questions, the material you had. We worked with the California Air Resources Board and DOSH, and I believe one other entity that I just can't recall at the moment, on that content. And that new exam is now available in book form for those who may not have access to the internet, but is also available online. And the nice thing with the online function is the minute you pass your exam, it's automatically communicated to our internal system, so no staff has to touch it for processing purposes. With regards to item 1.2, reviewing license determinations for consistency and develop industry bulletins, our licensing deputy, Hal Clay, has been working on that. We are getting close to releasing 2 industry bulletins in the near future. One will be on essentially debris removal when you're trying to create a defensible space around your house. There's been some consistent questions about that, and it's just prudent given, even though California doesn't really have a fire season anymore, just with the warming weather, we want to make sure that one gets out. And we've also identified trying to do about 3 of these each quarter, and so we're working through Hal's starting to prepare those, and then we work them through the process. With regards to item 1.3, I had already briefly spoken about that. And that's specifically looking at that remodel classification. And again, I agree. I agree with Nancy that it certainly is necessary that we get more creative on getting some more stakeholder involvement. So I look forward to any feedback that those of the board may have. We are meeting our objective in the strategic plan, but I certainly do want to keep pushing forward. With regard to 1.4, removing barriers to licensure, since that strategic plan was objective was put in place, legislation regarding criminal background reviews has actually been passed, thanks to monumental effort from Christy, as well as a staffer that works under Michael. Betsy, that regulation you've adopted, we're working through the process, and the implementation of that regulation would actually meet the specific strategic objective. With regard to 1.5, we're working on two things. We're looking on reviewing multiple qualifier responsibilities and bonding requirements. As part of the sunset bill, the legislature's already asked us to research bonding requirements, and former board member Linda Clifford has also helped to really provide us some research on the bonding requirements. So I'm excited to get to work with her on that, along with Michael. We hope to be preparing that this fall. I think we've been given quite a long deadline in the legislation, but I really think that we can easily get that done by the end of this year, unless there's larger questions, and if so, then we'll make sure we get those answered. With that, item 1.6, researching the feasibility of outsourcing the testing administration. We are finalizing a cost-benefit analysis that will then go under staff review. I'm going to let individuals in the testing division provide feedback, and you will be seeing that at our September board meeting. We will present the findings of that cost-benefit analysis and then be seeking direction from the board about where you'd like to go next with regard to that cost-benefit analysis. Finally, with item 1.7, working with Public Affairs and the Information Technology Department to work on an online application. I'm very happy with where we are in this process. I'm excited to move all of our functions online. IT has been working wonderfully on creating essentially a new interface that will walk the user through question by question. And it's not a perfect analogy, but the best way to describe it is it's very similar to how TurboTax will have you complete your taxes each year. You handle one particular set of questions, you answer them, you can't move on until that's all done. And our hope is that this is really going to reduce our error rate so that we don't have to return so many applications for corrections. That is moving along. DCA and our oversight agency are also evaluating our work plan at this point, and that's moving along very quickly. And we also are continuing to map our processes and procedures so that we can make sure all of our functions are going to go online. That's the long-term plan. I, for one, am personally going to be very happy when we can get renewals online. I think that's gonna really speed up for a lot of people the process. Moving to 1.8, we're reviewing the feasibility of continuing education or online testing for license renewal to keep up your license. We have not yet started that research. Our due date is July 2020, and I plan to begin this fall. With regard to item 1.9, working with public affairs and enforcement to create online courses to educate licensees. This is very closely associated with the next one. Again, we haven't started that yet, but we will be looking into that this coming fall. Item 110, expand public records and licensing information on the website to increase transparency. We actually have a working group formed with IT and our public affairs staff, and we're continuing to do that. That's an ongoing objective to get more items online. Item 1.11, we're evaluating call center processes and procedures for consistency. This has been a frustration by many stakeholders, including many of the licensing schools. And we're actually right now crafting a manual, and then we're going to shut down the call center on 2 different days, one in the summer, one in the fall, to do a detailed training with them. So we apologize for those 2 days. People won't be able to call in, but once we essentially have that manual ready to go, we're going to make sure we have an incredibly thorough training, just to make sure we are giving consistent and right answers on the phones. With that, item 112, again, this was already briefly mentioned. We're reviewing our subject matter expert selection process. That hasn't started yet, but that will, again, I plan to commence this fall. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Board members have any questions? None? Does anyone from the public have any questions? Hearing none. That concludes the licensing committee meeting.
Thank you, Frank. Moving on to enforcement, agenda item F, Kevin Albanese, our enforcement committee chair. Can you go ahead?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Agenda item F1 begins the Enforcement Committee update. We met on the 13th of May, where we discussed the adoption of a new prioritization guideline for the Enforcement Division, which we'll talk about later on in the meeting. Comes to you as a recommendation, fully formed motion. Provide an update on enforcement activities and our successful partnering with other state agencies. Is there any board or public comment on the committee meeting, item F1? Seeing and hearing none. Item F2, enforcement program update starts at page 71 with some investigation highlights beginning on page 74. At the top of page 74, first highlight demonstrates our continued focus on the predatory solar practices. Specifically, solar complaints that include funding through the Property Assessed Clean Energy Program that prior to January 1st, 2019, did not consider an individual's ability to repay the assessment, but only the existing equity in the home. In this particular highlight, an elderly customer entered into a solar installation contract for $50,000. The predatory contractor assisted the homeowner in procuring the PACE funding for $18,000, allegedly fraudulently, had the consumer sign a completion certificate before any work was done, which prompted PACE to make the payment to the contractor for the full $68,000, notwithstanding the fact the contractor hadn't performed on the job. The contractor abandoned the project after 3 days, asked the homeowner for another $43,000 to finish the job. The consumer filed a complaint with CSLB, and we partnered with the Department of Business Oversight and the district county of my home, the district attorney of my home county, Santa Clara County. The father and daughter behind the scam were charged with felony grand theft, financial elder abuse, and diversion of construction funds in April of 2019. In addition, our board has filed an administrative action to revoke that contractor's license. This demonstrates the benefit of us entering into an MOU with the California Public Utility Commission, the Department of Business Oversight to pull resources and to address these types of complaints, and shows our cooperation with the district attorney in Santa Clara County. So fantastic work on that. Too bad this consumer was ripped off. At middle of page 75, a very interesting highlight involving TSA officers at the airport. Investigation conducted by CSLB resulted in the issuance of an arrest warrant by the Riverside County District Attorney's Office for a construction-related felony charge. In July of 2017, Andreas Rubalcaba was apprehended, and in April of 2019, he pled guilty to felony grand theft and contracting without a license. We included this unique highlight because this individual went through a TSA airport of some sort, and TSA nabbed him and arrested him because of the outstanding warrant. So there's a lot of eyes on individuals who have these warrants against them, and so our enforcement is using all those resources. So great job in getting those warrants published and in keeping the different law enforcement agencies on their toes. As a member of the Board-Appointed Workers' Compensation Advisory Committee, the Sting targets tree service companies at the bottom of page 75 was impressive and further supports our effort to mandate workers' compensation and additional classifications. In summary, it's a 2-day operation in March conducted down in San Diego by our SWIFT investigators in conjunction with the San Diego Police Department and San Diego County District Attorney's Office. It was focused on unlicensed tree service contractors, a classification that not only requires a license, but requires a employee most of the time. 16 contractors provided bids that have required tree service license, resulting in the issuance of 22 notices to appear and 2 district attorney referrals. The results of the sting continue to support the need for a tree service specialty class rather than a limited classification and a mandatory workers' compensation requirement. The general complaint handling statistics can be found on page 76, and I'm going to ask Chief of Enforcement, Missy Vickery, to further address the statistics.
Thank you,
briefly.
Kevin. The chart on page 78 of your packet details case management statistics. It is important to note these statistics because CSLB is again settling citations through informal settlement conferences. We began doing that in January 2019 after getting legislation passed that the board sponsored. It's really important because our AG costs are of extreme concern right now, and we plan to track these settlements more closely in the future and adding this information to our packets to show our success. Turning to page 79, we are proud to report that during July 1st, 2018 through March 31st, 2019, our SWIFT operations conducted 57 sting operations in partnership with other state agencies, law enforcement, and district attorneys' offices. Working with other agencies, we also conducted an additional 248 sweep days, all targeting unlicensed activity in the underground economy. On page 84, you will see we continue to receive support from our JESF partners regarding mandating workers' comp coverage for additional classification. Registrar Foat gave a presentation at the JESF meeting on April 11, which was well received. Prior to that, on April 2nd, 2019, CSLB participated in a meeting that was hosted by the State Compensation Insurance Fund and attended by industry, other state agencies, and again, the topic was mandating workers' comp coverage for additional classes. We have a copy of those minutes available for you here today if you'd like to view them. That concludes my update, Kevin.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chief Vickery. Is there any public or board comment on agenda item F2? Fantastic. Moving on to agenda item F3, which starts at page 87, and I'm just going to get to the punchline real quick. There is a fully formed motion and recommendation that we adopt the guidelines on page 89. This was in response to the sunset review process where the legislature specifically asked questions about how complaints and cases are prioritized, what is our prioritization policy, and how does our policy differ or compare with DCA's complaint prioritization guidelines for healthcare agencies. So that was in response to that. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Chief Vickery to provide some further background and details of the proposed guidelines that comes to you as a recommendation and fully formed motion on page 89. Chief.
Thank you, Kevin. If you'll turn to your packet on page 87, you'll see that in 2013, the board adopted a prioritization matrix that you'll find there. We recognize that this chart needs to be updated to reflect current board priorities, such as addressing workers' comp avoidance, and as well as adding additional complaint categories that weren't previously captured. Some of those could be misuse of a license or diversion of funds. The chart as it currently exists also includes the complaint source, which is not always relevant in case prioritization. So in response, staff developed a new complaint prioritization chart, and you'll see that on page 89. The proposed chart has significant advantages over the current chart. The use of 4 categories that simply indicate how each complaint should be categorized from urgent, high, routine, or low. The use of color coding reinforces the priority of each type, urgent being red. The ranking of the complaint types has been adjusted to better reflect current board priorities. The chart includes nearly 2 times as many categories and complaint types to better convey how often complaint types should be prioritized. One thing I wanted to note on this chart is that sometimes a complaint can come in and it could include something like no building permit, but the permit violation is a health and safety violation, so it wouldn't be considered routine in the building permit department. It would be considered the highest violation. So whatever, if it has multiple categories that it would fit into, we would be looking for the highest violation to address to make sure we got to that timely. Staff believes that the proposed complaint prioritization guidelines chart more accurately reflect the board's objectives and priorities. That concludes my update. Kevin?
Thank you. Is there any board or public comment?
I have one comment. On the low priority assist bonds, how do those relate? We're not talking about a licensed bond, or what kind of bonds are we talking about?
A license bond, so if you have a claim against your bond, the bonding company notifies us, and then we look into if it was a valid bond claim. And we could possibly suspend your license if you failed to pay the bond back or become into a payment plan.
Okay, thanks.
Nancy?
I just want to thank Chief for clarifying that about the health and safety code violation, because I did misread this, and I was a little concerned that if it was a serious building permit violation or working out of class there, that it had a routine category. And I know I fully understand what you're saying here in regards to urgent. So thank you for that clarification.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Any additional board or public comment? Because this comes to the board as a fully formed motion to adopt the proposed complaint prioritization guidelines chart on page 89, there is no need for a first or second. Any public comment, board comment? Going once, twice. Felice, can you do the roll call vote, please?
Marlo Richardson.
Aye.
Kevin Albanese.
Aye.
Frank Altamira.
Aye.
Foggy Beltran.
Aye.
David Delatorre.
Aye.
Dave Diaz.
Yes.
Susan Granzella. Joan Hancock.
Aye.
Mike Layden. Frank Schroeder. Johnny Simpson.
Aye.
Nancy Springer. Motion passes.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Moving on to F4, the update and discussion of our enforcement strategic plan objectives, which begins on page 93. Missy will lead a high-level and brief discussion on our strategic plan.
Thank you, Kevin. I'd like to draw your attention to item 2.1, which includes formalizing a disaster response program for greater efficiencies and to improve response time. As an update, we are preparing for the 2019 wildfire season, and a disaster response task force meeting with other state agencies and industry partners is currently being calendared. In addition to that, we have dedicated a position, added duties to another position of Program Manager Chewy Ibarra, who has become the Disaster Response Coordinator. So anytime resources are needed throughout the whole state, he coordinates the resources and makes sure we have staffing available, whether it's coordinating with our SWIFT unit to get the boots on the ground to put the signs in or do sweeps, or coordinating with the Department of Insurance or staffing the local assistance centers. Additionally, we have tracking systems in place where we can track expenditures and resource expenditures, so we know how many hours we're spending on each certain area and how many PYs we may be looking to supplement, or sometimes as a justification we come to the board and say, our caseloads are high because we spent so many hours working at these fires. So it's important that we track those statistics. Going on to objective 2.2, it involves educating the public about the complaint and investigative process, and as well as the resources available for financial redress. When a consumer files a complaint, they receive a computer-generated letter that outlines the complaint process. And what we're doing is we expect by the June 30th to have that updated to include information on the complaint process as well as other avenues for financial redress. So that should be done by June 30th. Lastly, I'd like to bring your attention to objective 2.5, which includes the development of a complaint prioritization chart that we just spoke about and it was earlier approved by the board. Additionally, starting in July 2019, supervisors will be submitting monthly reports highlighting staff recognitions. Some of those may be included in Dave's weekly report or in the enforcement bulletin, so that we can start recognizing staff statewide for their accomplishments. That concludes my update.
Outstanding. Is there any public or board comment on agenda item F3? Seeing and hearing none, that concludes the enforcement update. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. The time is now 2:28. We're going to take a quick recess for 10 minutes, so expect to start back at 2:38.